Hindu philosophy, which is what this book is based on, can be so abstract, right? It can be very difficult to grasp sometimes, like especially when you kind of peel back the layers. And this is actually why. So Hinduism is like religion that is more than like 5,000 years old, and it has endured, because a lot of those philosophies have become stories, in the forms of gods and goddesses and all of that, and they've been passed down. But because simplifying those philosophies into elemental gods and that kind of thing is a lot easier than it is to explain to the common person, like, this is this weird abstract universal philosophy, right? So I mean, to that extent, like, science fiction and fantasy is kind of embedded into the Hindu culture.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 59 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, MJ Kuhn. How's it going, MJ?
Hello. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you so much. And you can also pick up a copy of Among Thieves, MJ's fantastic debut. If you like foul-mouthed thieves who go on heists and fuck each other over and do fun things and fight with hatchets, Among Thieves is for you. You can also pick up a pre-order of Thick as Thieves, which is out on July 25th, so you can support MJ and everything that she does. As well, a quick note for listeners, the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are live, so you can check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel, where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. Also, shout out to our newest patron on Patreon, Matt Westfall. Thank you so much for helping us do what we do here. We really appreciate it. And now, welcoming today's fantastic guest author, Kritika H. debut author of The Surviving Sky. How's it going, Kritika?
Good. I'm so happy to be here. How are you guys?
Doing really well, and happy to have you here too.
Excited to have you.
Yeah.
It's been a long time coming, but just to kick things off, for anyone who isn't familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Kritika H. I'm the author of The Surviving Sky. It is an epic science fantasy based on Hindu philosophy. And it's essentially a story about this husband-wife duo who are trying to save their marriage while they try to save their city from falling into jungle storms. It's a floating city. It's really cool. There's like tons of like plant magic and architecture and like engineering. And I just threw all the stuff that I love into this book, and it's real.
And MJ and I have both read it, and it's really, really good.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's like
chunky,
unlike,
boy, but it's good.
It's chunky, but it's unlike anything I've read like in recent memory. It's great. Now I'm curious, how did you get into reading in general? Like, I feel like we all have like a nerd origin story. So what is yours? Specifically sci-fi fantasy, if you remember. Like, what was the first book that just like caught you?
So, I mean, that's really hard to remember because I've kind of been reading all my life. Like, as soon as like I could reading, could read. I've been reading. My mom used to. My mom is an English school teacher. She isn't working in that field anymore. But when she did, she would bring back these like big stacks of like books like nearly every single day when we were kids. And like I wouldn't even come to like say hi to her. I would run towards those books like first and foremost because I was
What you got for me?
I was a rude child. So I was like, books, give me. And I was this nerdy kid who would like take books everywhere. Like, like I would eat while reading. Like my parents would have these parties or like go out, and I always had a book, and just kind of be secluded in my little corner reading, totally antisocial, not making friends, giving them the side eye,
Making fictional friends.
I was going to say you were making friends on paper.
Yeah, that's right. And look at me now, I'm popular. So
see, you're like, it paid off, Mom.
So my parents actually they've been like, they were always super encouraging of us, my brother and I, reading. And it's funny because I grew up in India, and I lived in the Sultanate of Oman too. I did my like high school and middle school and everything there. but India doesn't have like a huge like science fiction and fantasy, just like it doesn't have that vibe really. Like it's only kind of starting right now. There's a lot of like literary fiction and yeah, just like more serious fiction, which kind of runs more popularly in India. Um, so my introduction into science fiction and fantasy, I have to say, came like almost via thriller. Like I used to read a lot of Michael Crichton, and Michael Crichton is marketed as a thriller writer, like not really science fiction or fantasy. So Jurassic
But
Park,
Jurassic
and
Park is
yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna
sci-fi.
say
yeah,
there's definitely sci-fi in there though. Yeah.
totally. And Prey, and like, I mean, really pick up any of his books, and they're very science fiction. And so I read one, and then I started to read more and more, and that was really like my entry into science fiction and fantasy. It really came through science fiction first, even though now I'm very much more of a fantasy first writer. Yeah. So it's weird, right? How, where you start and where you kind of get to.
Yeah. But you mentioned about like I've talked to Samit Basu about this, about like growing up in India and the kind of like idea of like genre and sci-fi and fantasy is just kind of
Hmm.
muddled, and there's not really like a clear sense of what's what. But for you, like thinking back on like what it was like growing up in India and then now kind of like what you perceive in terms of living in North America and how we view science fiction and fantasy here,
Yeah.
what are the kind of things that you can kind of compare and contrast there?
It's so huge, right? It's so like science fiction and fantasy here and now. I mean, I don't even want to just say North America. Like in recent times, with the explosion of like TV and science fiction and fantasy, right? And like movie
Yeah.
science fiction and fantasy, even something like MCU, which is science fiction and fantasy, like it's just exploded into like um I guess into so many different audiences beyond the, what it used to be once upon a time. This really like, nerdy, wide group of, people who are very into this kind of stuff and not really out to many, many more people. But it's become such a commercial thing right now. So, I mean, I don't even know if this is like, if this is a, this is a matter of like North America versus living in like Asia or in India, etc. I think it's just a matter of like the times that we live in right now in to some respects. Like I imagine, I haven't lived in India for a very long time, but like with the explosion of all of these different forms of media and how well they're doing, and I hate to refer to a book by She Who Must Not Be Named, but even that, back when it did come, like it was very much a science fiction fantasy thing that exploded for young kids of that age who are now adults,
Yeah.
right? So um yeah, but I remember like, I mean, yeah, I read Harry Potter when I was a kid, etc. But like, I never really thought of that being my entry into science fiction and fantasy. I have to say, like, for me, it was very much like, the more the more serious. When I say serious, I mean, of course, like that giant dinosaurs eating people. Right?
That's
The
pretty
more
serious. I mean,
that's pretty
people
serious.
died.
I know. Yeah, it was catastrophic. So, so for me, that was my entry into science fiction and fantasy. It's I don't quite know what it's like right now in India. I mean, I have friends, Indian authors who live in India, but from what I hear, like again, it is still a very nascent industry there. And like I think I'm very privileged now to be living in North America and to have access to kind of readers and authors and communities, etc. That is so entrenched in science fiction and fantasy. I can't imagine like in many other parts of the world that this is um, just as common.
Yeah, for sure. And for you, coming from young Kritika, just huddling off in the corner
Yeah,
with her books,
yeah.
to now being in North America and having access, like you said, to
I mean, I still
readers
huddle in the corner with my books. I'm not any cooler. I should just
with your
clarify.
baby.
Yeah, with
you
my
and your baby
baby. Yeah,
huddled in
that's
the
true.
corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like access to like agents
Hmm.
and publishers and stuff like that, more direct access, I guess. What was it like for you in terms of like your journey toward becoming a writer, and what inspired you to follow this path from being such an avid reader to wanting to write your own stuff?
I used to write as a kid. Again, like I was one of those like
Yeah.
really, yeah, I would read, and then I would like have my own stories that I would write. And like I was always like, I was a kid in school when you were given like an essay or there was a competition. I'd be like, yeah, this is my time to shine. And so so I was definitely that kid, and I did well. Like I won prizes, etc. And I would publish in like national and international like magazines when I was a teenager. And I always wanted to be a writer. But back then, I think like one of the things that I always imagined, because again, like, I don't know, this might have been my own ignorance back in the day, or maybe this was just a narrative then, is like writers are only like super old people. You got to be like 60 or something, and then you become a writer, right? Like
You have to
don't,
retire.
you have to
before you
retire. You don't
become
just
then
become a
you can
writer.
write.
Then you can write. And and I started like seriously writing like my first book when I came right out of college, and of course by then my perception had changed. But right after undergrad, I started working on my first book. And back in those days, it wasn't like it is now. You couldn't contact agents on Twitter, or you didn't have query
Right.
manager. You had these like you had like these self-address SASE, they were called. I can't remember what it was, the
Mm-hmm.
short form, but essentially you would like put your manuscript and your query letter and all of that into this big, like print it out into this folder and then send it off to the agents, and then get back a single sheet, which was a nice form rejection letter. So I did all of that. And and then I moved to North America, and like obviously I wrote more after that, after my first disastrous attempt. And right here in Calgary, which is where I live, there was this convention, When Words Collide, which is actually, unfortunately, it's closing down now. But that's where I met my agent, and by then, like, I'd kind of started getting a little bit more active on Twitter, etc. I was also one of those writers who was like, "No, writing can only happen in isolation. I shouldn't be talking to anyone. I should be doing." So I did everything right, as you can tell, right? So,
Community doesn't mean anything.
yeah, community doesn't mean anything. Like, God, like the way community saved my ass. So, like, wow, what was I thinking back in the day? But yeah, that was kind of my journey. And I picked up really quickly after, like, I started learning more and more about the industry. I got in touch with many authors, like, and many readers and bloggers and podcasters and all of that. And it was just, I think I felt really, really welcomed. I was one of those people who was extremely shy about like being in author communities. Like, none of my friends, like in real life friends, are authors or even very much readers, etc. I was very much like an outlier in my group. And that kind of made me not want to also go out and do stuff and like look for people. But then I kind of bit the bullet, and I was like, if I want to make a career out of this, I better start thinking of it as a career. So I think that switch in my perception really kind of helped me. And then and here I am talking to you cool people.
Yeah. And you can still huddle in the corner with your books if you want to, but also be active in the community at the same time.
It's true.
Oh,
Now
you
it's a
can.
choice. It's
Yeah.
not a compulsion anymore. And you know what? Now I'm in a community where a bunch of other people will be huddling in the corner with me, and that's cool.
Yes,
Cheering you
that's what I was gonna
on.
say. That's
Like,
the
fucking go
beautiful
for it.
thing about the author and writer community, is because I feel like most of us are naturally huddle in a corner with a book kind of people.
Yeah.
So it's like we all kind of understand each other.
Mhm.
Totally. So yeah,
I
that
want
was
to
my
dig
journey.
into. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I just want to dig into the Surviving Sky specifically because I mean, it's fantastic. I had the opportunity, thankfully, to read it early, and gosh, it just like gripped me by the throat. Like, the world is so completely vivid. And so I'm just curious, like, where did the idea come from? What inspired the world specifically? And then I know that, it explores some Hindu mythology and philosophy elements. And I just want to know, how sci-fi fantasy, why did that feel like the right kind of playground to fit in all those elements?
Yeah. So when I started writing The Surviving Sky, the story really started from Iravan and Ahilia, to the extent that I always knew it was very character first in a sense, and the world kind of came from them in many ways, which is interesting because like world building is one of the things that I often hear about in the in reviews, etc. It's like, oh my god, this world building is so cool, and it is cool. Don't get me wrong, but that's not where I started.
It's not everything, man.
Yeah, no. So so for me, the story really started with Iravan and Ahilia, and I knew it was going to be science fiction and fantasy because by that point when I was writing it, like I had very firmly become a science fiction and fantasy writer and reader, and like that was the genre that I really operated in. And it made sense for this book because Hindu philosophy, which is what this book is based on, can be so abstract, right? It can be very difficult to grasp sometimes, like especially when you kind of peel back the layers. And this is actually why. So Hinduism is like religion that is more than like 5,000 years old, and it has endured, because a lot of those philosophies have become stories, in the forms of gods and goddesses and all of that, and they've been passed down. But because simplifying those philosophies into, elemental gods and that kind of thing is a lot easier than it is to explain to the common, person, like this is this weird abstract universal philosophy, right? So, I mean, to that extent, like science fiction and fantasies is kind of embedded into the Hindu culture, stories of, magic and that kind of thing is very much a living part of Hindu culture. So for me, like taking those philosophies and breaking them and giving them new metaphors and new like shapes, etc., that felt very much a part of the genre work that that is science fiction and fantasy. So this was very much the right vehicle for it. Yeah, and like it's interesting to me when people who belong to the Hindu tradition, like when they read the book, the things that they pick up on, it's very interesting to me that stuff that gets picked up on, because I feel like anyone can read the book and you're not missing out. Like, you will read the book, you'll still have fun, you'll still have like you will still understand like everything. There's just this added like extra, like almost like an Easter egg, which, people who belong to that culture would be like, huh, I see what you did there, So that's kind of cool. It's exciting to kind of do that and represent that.
That's really awesome that you're able to layer in that kind of stuff, because it is very personal to you, and then at the same time you're able to kind of give that to the culture and the community that you grew up with. And I love that like Hindu philosophy and mythology is kind of like a big foundation for this world and for their characters. Are there any like other books or shows or games or philosophies or religions or anything that served as inspiration for certain elements of the story?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like there's a bit of like everything that I kind of loved in it. So so clearly the gigantic animals like yakshas. So yakshas in Hindu mythology are forest spirits. Like they're not necessarily animal shaped or anything. But I interpreted them in that way because I was like, heck, this is the closest I'm getting to Jurassic Park. So like they are massive creatures. They are big, massive creatures.
Hindu dinosaurs.
Yeah, I'm just gonna like throw that in because like I love this and like this is like my own little thing for myself, right?
Yeah.
I really liked for Surviving Sky. I hear this a lot. Like people are like, I deliberately used thriller pacing in the Surviving Sky because I also read a lot of thriller. Again, like Michael Crichton is one, but in recent times, of course, like Gone Girl was a big one, and I really liked the way the dual perspective kind of happened in Gone Girl. So that was a big inspiration for the way that Ahilya and Ravan also told their story. It was very much a dual perception. So Gone Girl does this so well because you're reading Nick's perspective, and then you're reading, I think it's Amy's perspective, and you're like, huh, Nick is right, and then you're reading Amy, and you're like, oh my god, she's right. And of course, there's like I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but right towards the end, there's this big twist, etc. But that part of it, which is when you're reading one character and you're so behind their head that you're so very much like, they've got a point. Like, I totally sympathize with them. And yeah, I might not agree with everything they're saying, but I get them. I really wanted to capture that spirit, which is how I wrote Ravan and Ahilya too. And I often hear that from readers saying, God, they're so frustrating, but also I get them, but also I just want them, to stop fighting, but also I just want them to kiss. Like, so
it's like that that like he said, she said kind of thing where it's just like, like just like, oh, like I hate that you're right, and it's like fuck, like like getting your emotions all twisted based on becoming attached to a character and then being like, I get your perspective and everything, and then the other character is just like, your perspective means a lot too, and then it's just like, but it conflicts, and it's just like, fucking hell.
Yeah,
that's when the characters are written well, right? Is when they are so full and well-rounded that they are the right in their own story, and when you read from their perspective, I completely got that in The Surviving Sky, because you going back and forth, and I'd be like, oh, Ravan, you're wrong, and then I'd go from his perspective, and I'd be like,
it's like, go after her, man.
Yeah.
Fuck.
It's all right. It's all right, MJ. You can call him an asshole. He is a better one. So I almost like
sometimes though.
Yeah, we all are.
They're both kind of assholes.
They both are kind of assholes. Yeah, but they're also like really, really good people who are trying their best to like do right by themselves and each other in this world. Except like it's such a complicated, complex like dynamic that they find themselves in, and that it just gets hard for them. And it's not like they don't want to talk to each other, and they do often. It's just that when they talk, they're not saying the right things. So,
Yes.
use your
I
words.
feel like
You're intelligent. So,
yes, I feel like that's done so well too because like I feel like there is a correct way to do the miscommunication trope and it's done here because when it's just like, oh, we're in the same room and we could just easily whatever, but it's like you can tell you're so deep inside their perspective, you can tell they're trying to get out what they're trying to say, and it's so relatable.
But pride gets in the way.
oh yeah,
it does, but that's such a relatable thing, especially, and I feel like a fascinating element of this story, well, obviously, is the relationship dynamic between those two POV characters. And, we don't see a lot of married protagonists in sci-fi fantasy. Or if we do, it's like, he was married, but then the wife dies, and now we are on a mission for revenge.
Yeah, or like
bridging the wife, right? Yeah.
Yeah, or like the wife or the husband is just like they're mentioned, but it's like they don't have any tangible.
They're mostly off page or things like that, and just having like
they don't have any tangible
marriage
presence in the story. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, having the marriage.
Like, oh, he just like looks like longingly at this like wedding ring. It's like, fuck that.
It's like it's implied. Yeah. I'm just curious why you chose to tell the story from the perspective of a married couple, because I felt like that was a really cool way to it made the characters, for me at least, more relatable because they were suffering from such a real world problem in such a fantastical world, which was fascinating for me.
Yeah, that was one of those things that I knew very early on, that Ahelia and Niravan are going to be married. And there were a few reasons. One, as you said, like I had not seen enough of that myself, right? Like even now I've sometimes like I have to think a lot to say, well, which other, like, maybe Dune, but they weren't really married, like they were, that's another thing. So so for me, like that was one of those early things that I kind of knew. And one of the reasons is because Ahilia and Niravan do personify like two dual points in Hindu philosophy, the subjective and the objective, and like many different things like that, and you probably have to edit this because its answer is not going well.
It's okay. Roll with it.
Roll with it. Okay. Can you ask me the question again?
Yeah. So why did you choose to tell the story from the perspective of a married couple?
Well, yeah, one was the Hindu philosophy duality. One was the fact that I hadn't seen very much of this. And then the other one was the fact that, I kind of thought about the audience who I'm writing for, right? And you often see these stories which are coming of age. You have 19, 20-year-olds who, of science fiction and fantasy. Fantasy especially is rife with this, characters. I belong to a generation of 30-something readers, who are living in this world right now. They have families, they have jobs, they have like things that they worry about, like pandemics and climate change and wars and and generational trauma and coming to terms with their history and their privilege and lack of, and all of these things which we are faced with, right? And their own power dynamics, and living and working and marrying people who are not like them and don't belong to the cultures and backgrounds, etc., that they do, and raising families and that kind of a place. So I think at some level I was trying to address that too, and really write for the kind of reader that I am. Like I no shade against books which feature 1920 protagonists. Like there's a place for that, but I just don't read that kind of stuff anymore, and I'm not drawn to it. Like it's not something that I can connect to. Again, I belong to this like generation of like millennials or whoever, who we grew up on these dreams and like, this is what the world is going to be like. And, this is what we've kind of trained to be, etc. And now we are here in our own realities as adults. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel very much in control. There's so much that we cannot control and so much that we are aware of that we don't control. And a lot of Ahilia and Iravan's journey is also very much like that. Like Iravan is at the top of the food chain. Like he has all of the power. He is, one of the most privileged architects in his city. Ahilia is also like, she does, she's obviously a brilliant woman, who, has her passion, etc. But neither of them, like when you especially read the book and you see like all of the things that their lives depend on, they often don't have a lot of choice in the things that they are allowed to do or can do, or the circumstances they find themselves in. And I think that is a reflection of a lot of us. We have a lot of agency, just like Ahilia and Iravan do. We can choose to do many things, but often we can't control our circumstances. Like we are very aware, I think, of the fact that there are corporations and millionaires and societal structures, etc., that we cannot personally do anything about. And that I think is, I don't think that that kind of dynamic is reflected very much in science fiction and fantasy, and I kind of wanted to do it through Ahelia
Agreed.
and Aravan. And yeah, so that was really, I mean, it makes it sound like I was, thinking about all of these things when I was writing. And I was just like, as I said, I was just like, what is my reality and how can I depict that in
Exactly.
like a science fiction fantasy world, which is completely unlike ours, but also so similar to ours, right?
Yeah, it's just that though. It's like writing our truths, and because it feels genuine to you.
Yeah.
That's why it feels so genuine on the page, because it's like, yeah, as we get older, you're just like,
You're tired.
shit, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm tired. Like my kids kept me up at night, and it's like jobs are shit, and like life is just difficult. And I like that kind of comparison that you make between like what we dreamt of as kids versus the reality we experience as adults.
And also like we
And
have to do these like daily things like taking care of our kids and going to
Mhm.
work and all of that in the grander narrative of the society and all of these things that we live in, the world that we live in, the planet that we live on, all of these things, like we don't disengage from that, we're engaging with it too. And it's like there's a small bubble and then there's a big bubble, and they both like feed into each other. I mean, that's how our realities are right now, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure as a parent, you yourself, Adrian, like you're constantly thinking about the kind of parenting you're doing, and how you're raising your kids in this world to be like good citizens and forces of kindness and love and all of the good things, while understanding that this world is a pretty jerk place, right? I mean,
Yes.
I'm a parent, and I think that too, and it's a
and at the
difficult thing.
same time, like confronting the reality of like who you are and being
Oh,
like, shit,
yeah,
I'm flawed.
yeah,
which is
yeah,
why Iravan and Ailia are so relatable, is because it's like, not it's cool, they are married, that's really awesome to see, but at the same time it's like, okay, this is a story, and to create good conflict and good tension there, it's like their relationship is fraught, and that kind of, like you said, it like acts as a parallel to the world that you've created, in terms of like, these are the social structures, these are the cultural kind of like restrictions and expectations, and when it comes to things like what an architect what is expected of them when it comes to a marriage or children or all these different kinds of things, the fact that their relationship and their marriage is kind of falling apart makes that so much more exciting and engaging for
it's
me.
sad, right?
So I was curious, yeah, and
Yeah.
sad, like really sad. So like for you, what okay, you wrote them as a married couple, but what was it about a failing marriage that was a good kind of baseline for exploring the world and these two characters in particular?
I love this question because I mean the entire theme behind Surviving Sky in many ways is survival, right? I mean the word survival makes its way into the title itself. Like this is a floating plant city that is, essentially just kind of hovering above these jungle storms. This planet is constantly ravaged by these jungle storms that come and go, they come and go. So life is not possible on the surface of the planet. So civilization is essentially taken to the skies, and hovers above the skies. Um, hovers above the jungle into the skies, and it lands every now and then when the jungle kind of calms down, but then the next storm comes, and again it must take off. And this is so much like Ahelia and Ravan themselves, isn't it? Like they come together, and then just when you think that there's going to be peace and they're going to figure their shit out, something else happens, and then they break up.
Rage.
Yeah, it's rage. And there's a lot of anger in the book. Like it's called the Rages trilogy. The storms themselves are called Earth Rages. Ahelia and Ravan have a lot of anger, which they talk about in the book, for the world and for themselves. That doesn't change the fact that they love each other, but they're still so angry. And in many ways, like righteously and rightfully angry. They both have, their anger is justified for both of them in many ways through the lens that they kind of view it from, right? So I think failing marriage for me was so perfect. Like I look back on Surviving Sky, and this is often how I write my books because I am so immersed in the world, in the story when I'm writing it. Like everything kind of, when I'm writing it, everything kind of blanks out. So layers upon layers of those kind of build on their own, really, like without any kind of manufacturing, because that's just when I'm kind of focused in writing, it just kind of tends to happen. But looking back, I'm like, well, all of this kind of is very, it's very ingrained through like their relationship and the world and the philosophies and just the plot, etc. Everything ties really well into each other. It's very fractalized. I think that's a word that I'm kind of looking for. Scales upon scales upon scales. So failing marriage is like you see these two people who are trying to survive. They're trying to survive this marriage, and they're trying to survive all of the different things that affect their marriage, and they're trying to still come back to each other and love each other in a similar way that civilization is still trying to survive this planet, which is essentially trying to kill them. And Iravan and Ahilya, in many ways, like they're doing this, and they're finding beauty in each other and themselves. Like there's conflict, but there's also really beautiful moments that they share. Just like the world of the surviving sky, like the city is, floating above the planet, but in all of its descriptions, etc., it's very lush, it's very beautiful, it's very, it's not like this like metallic city and super, clean lines. And no, it's wavy and beautiful, and there's plants, and there's like, magic that sparks into like beautiful colors, and all of that. But at the heart of it is there's also this like survival, that what they're really aiming for is survival. So I think a failing marriage was just a beautiful way to do that. And failing not because of somebody cheating on you, or something, an easy answer like that. Failing because they love each other, but they just can't seem to like work together as much as they want to. And yeah, I thought that was a really good depiction of the world itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I saw that, but hearing you talk about it, I see so much more of it thinking about it. And like I think that's so beautiful, that parallel of the floating city and the earth, and the pair of them coming
This
together
duality
in
of
moments of
survival.
calm. Yes.
Yeah.
And then breaking apart. So I want to dive more into those earth rages though, because it's such a fascinating story element. And it's such a, I mean, I think it's a big part of why the world building is so interesting to so many people, I think, because again, it's not something I've seen before. And I think that the heart of the story is really a mystery. And it's, you mentioned, thriller pacing and things like that. And it's the mystery of these giant yaksha animals, right? And Ahilya seeking to understand like what is going on with these creatures.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious how you managed balancing those mystery elements with the more traditional sci-fi fantasy elements that are woven throughout the story.
Yeah, again, like I don't know if I have a deep answer to this. As I said, like I just threw stuff that I really love into, and then, so a lot of my books, actually, all of my books will have a mystery plotline, because one of the things that I really enjoy reading are mysteries. When I reading as a child, etc., like my library was full of like Agatha Christie's, and books like that, which I loved, and I just devoured them. And it is still like a genre which I really, really enjoy reading and watching, and that kind of thing. I think I think mysteries really lend themselves well to being page turners, because there's always a question and a clue and an answer and a red herring and all of that. So you're really following that plot along. And Surviving Sky, for all of its world building and its character conflict, etc., I think is a very plot oriented story still. It is not, there's not a lot of hand waving. It's not just all vibes. It's there is a very pretty like decent thick plot which moves through the story and keeps things moving along. So I think I always knew that there was going to be a mystery in there. And Ahilya's like understanding of the yakshas and how they survive on the planet, on the surface of the planet, and nothing else can. It's just one of the many mysteries in the book, and they all just kind of like weave together. You think you're following one plot line, and then it kind of coincides and intersects with another one, and all of that. The answer to how I did that is I get bored really easily. So I don't know if this is going to be helpful to your readers or to your listeners, but when I kind of start talking about like I'm following this plot line, etc., I usually don't have a problem with like losing my plot, because not that I'm keeping like massive Excel sheets, and I do have my planning documents, of course I do. But I also like if I dwell too long on any one thing, like my writer brain and my reader brain actually goes like, well, move it along, who cares, get on to the other thing. So, I mean, that's one reason why a lot of the world and the plot, etc., kind of evolved in the way that it did, and again, having the mystery element really helped, because for me, I was like, well, what is the next question? And what is the next answer that is going to lead to something, a discovery or whatever it is. I mean, that's more of a facetious, flippant answer, but a better answer would be that the Surviving Sky and the Rages trilogy, especially based on the philosophy that it is based on, is very much a study of questions. It is not like, yeah, all the plot questions are resolved. You get answers, they're fun, I hope. I think they're fun. But at the heart of it, Surviving Sky is about asking questions. And it is, both Ahelia and Iravan. Ahelia is an archaeologist. Obviously, her entire business is to ask questions, about survival and so on and so forth. Iravan is also kind of an academic. He's a senior architect. He studies consciousness, he's at the top of his game. And he didn't get there by, taking the right answer, etc. He's always questioning things. And whether or not they find answers to those questions, whether personal or world, etc., is almost irrelevant to them. Like, they also connected very much on the academic thing themselves, is that they wanted the idea of asking questions, I think, is very important to them and to the book. So there's philosophies embedded in there, and I throw away ideas almost. Like, I picked up my book at random and I was just like, that line could really become its own like book idea, really. And it's just a throwaway idea. And I think there's a lot of different things like that within the Surviving Sky, which might become more apparent on like a second and third read. Because in the first read, it's very much a part of the plot. It's very much a part of the world, and part of the contextual imagery and all of that. So the mystery, a mystery plot, really kind of lent itself well to the kind of philosophies, etc., that I'm really trying to show through the book. And
Right.
it just kind of mirrored that in some ways. And of course, it kept things moving along, which is always nice. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's good because it's like, I mean, it kind of plays into this like fractal nature of the book that you were talking about, but it's like the thriller, thrillers are, generally shorter. They're generally like, short chapters, boom, boom, boom. So I like that you kind of applied thriller techniques, but you didn't make it like a pure thriller at its heart. It's like you use thriller elements and techniques and mystery elements and techniques and kind of like weaved it through. And I love what you said about like asking questions and that being kind of like a core aspect of the series. It's like I even tattooed myself like right here, like I don't know how many years ago, maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, and it just says ask the next question.
Love it.
Because I feel like asking the next question as a writer, as a reader, as a person, as a friend, as a husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever your relationship is to another human, is always going to open new doors to more interesting things. And that's what makes for a good book. It's like, cool, you answered some questions, but you asked more. And that keeps the plot and the characters and everything moving forward. And, I wanted to ask you about the different aspects of this world that you created. You got the Yaksha, the floating cities, the earth rages and the harsh jungle environment, all this different kind of stuff. How were they good vehicles for you on this notion of asking questions, to ask questions about our connection with nature or big themes like climate change and things like that? Because nature is such a huge part of this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've touched on it too much. You mentioned like the floating cities are kind of like intertwined with plants.
Living,
they're living, breathing cities, and the magic system as well is very much intertwined with this notion of nature and kind of like consciousness and how those two intersect.
I have to admit, when I first started writing The Surviving Sky, even though it was, it was based on jungle storms and plant life and plant magic, like nature and the exploration of climate change was not one of the forefront themes, of writing this book and this trilogy. The themes really were very much like, as I said, consciousness and, asking who you are as you are part of this world and in a relationship and all of those things. But nature kind of crept into this book, I have to say. Like it, obviously it did.
Like nature does.
Like nature does, right? It's so cool in incidents. And like when people ask me this question, I always feel like, how do I answer this without sounding like a fraud? Because I didn't deliberately put this in. It kind of happened on its own. But I think that part of it came not from planning; it came through the writing itself. Like I'm very much a planner when I'm writing, and of course, like over the years, like I've internalized a lot of my planning, structures and elements, etc. So I've kind of moved a little bit more into becoming more of a pantser, and with some exceptions, etc. But when I was writing Surviving Sky, it crept into the writing of it. Like as I was writing descriptions, etc., then I started asking those questions. Like always ask the next question about like what does this mean? For the world that they're living in. For me, initially, the Earth Rages, and this I'm talking like way, way back when I first like envisioned the story, and you know how much a story can change from the first time you like think of it to when it's a finished thing, right? Back then, it was just this like cool climactic thing. I'm just like, let's put it in. Like it gave a lot of cool like visuals. It had a lot of like cool like cinematography, that I could describe. A lot of cool action scenes. So part of the reason that I put it in there initially was that. But as I said, it kind of crept in. And then it started to, expand and explore on this relationship that people, in this case, society, etc., have, with nature themselves. Like they can't, at some point, they're pondering like the ethics of their decision. They're like, can we ethically make this decision, even if it means our survival, right? Like there are many questions like that that they end up asking. So I don't know if this was something that I specifically laid into the book going in. I think this is something that evolved, and it's something that kind of happened on its own without me really looking at this change and expecting it to happen, which I think is beautiful and lovely, because that, as you said, Adrian, that is often how nature works. It's we often think of nature as this thing that we're going to go out and experience nature, so it's not always like it's not already and always a consistent part of our world. And we often separate ourselves from nature, so we don't belong to nature. And but it becomes a part of art. It is a part of art. It shapes and changes us in many ways as much as we shape and change it. And in the world of Surviving Sky, they're literally shaping their world like through magic, right? But the world is shaping them too. It's giving rise to all of their conflicts and problems. The fact that their magic source is running low, and many other things. All of the different problems that they have in their world is because nature is reacting right back to them. And even in that world, like architects never really go into the jungle. Helia is an outlier. They want to go into the jungle. Even in that world, they look as, even though they're constantly manipulating nature, they still think of nature as this outside beast. The jungle is the jungle. It's outside. Like we live in our plant cities.
Chaos.
It's chaos. We live in our controlled plant cities, and we can do something about that. And it's very much a mirror to what we do as well. But nature creeps in. And, it kind of did in this book too, without me having to really embed it in there.
That's
I think
awesome.
that's such a beautiful point, about just the book itself, but also about like the writing process. Cause I feel like it's often I don't know, something people think like you come in like with your big, capital M message, and like that's, and sometimes you may, right? But like sometimes you don't, right? And it's the story, like the floating island is a living thing, and it, evolves with you as you write it. And I think that's beautiful and was beautifully stated there. So we know we have 2 more books in the Rages trilogy. So I'm just curious, like, what's coming next? Do you have anything on the docket after those? Any thoughts coming through, or what can we expect from those next books? Just anything you can give us on the future.
Oh yeah. Well, the next book is already with my editors. I'm awaiting like edits back, so it's done, and I'm kind of midway through drafting the 3rd book of the trilogy, and it's all coming together so beautifully. I'm so excited about this series. The second book gets a little darker, I think. It's actually quite a bit darker. And Helia and Ravan, like they, in many ways, they've solved quite a chunk of the issues that they, started off with in the first book. And they don't revisit them. It's not like, suddenly they find themselves back on square one. That's not the kind of book it is. And that's not the kind of series it is.
We're fighting again.
Yeah, but they do fight again. Like I think that's a big part of the personalities and their relationship at this point. I mean, they've been married 11 years. They're gonna have their dynamic, and kind of evolved in that way. But I think what happens is in this book, in the second book, I don't know how much of a spoiler it is, but in some ways, like their dynamic shifts. At the start of in The Surviving Sky, one of them has a lot of privilege and the second one does not. And in many ways, that dynamic almost shifts, except there's an added element of the kinds of power they have and the kinds of power they're allowed to use.
I would say like the playing field is almost leveled between them more so than like there's like a complete switch,
but in different ways,
dynamics.
right?
In
It's
different
like
ways.
the scales are sliding. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very much a sliding scale kind of thing. And I think for them, both of them find themselves in a position which they've never been before. And almost on opposite sides in terms of like where Erawan was, previously Ahilya finds herself there. And, where Ahilya was, that's where Erawan kind of finds himself like a little bit more an outsider, that kind of thing. Whereas Ahilya is a little bit more accepted, which is not how they start off in Surviving Sky. So it takes them to some really wild and difficult places, I think, and they also go through a lot of chaos. No, chaos is not the right word. They go through some trauma in their own personal lives and their marriage. And unlike in The Surviving Sky, where they are very much like, they are trying really hard to reconcile their marriage, in the second book, that's not really the question. Like, we know that they want to be together, but they the difficulty is that somehow they can't again. So it's so it gets dark, and the world itself also experiences some surprises, which obviously are not there in the first book, but they're not surprises kind of thrown off like, oh, book 2 needs conflict, I'm just going to throw it in there. Like, that's not how it is. Like,
Kritika's bored.
Let's throw some in there.
Yeah, what can I throw in there? Like, let's have some aliens drop. But no, that's not how it goes. But actually, a lot of the consequences of book 1, like unintended consequences from things that happen and the decisions and choices that are made in book 1, make themselves apparent in book 2 in ways that nobody saw coming. And like, for me, I'm the kind of reader, like, if I love a book in a series, like, I've lost myself in it. Like, my husband and I will read it, and we will, like, I don't go on Reddit at all, but we kind of have those conversations where we're like, well, why did this character do this? And like, what do you think this? Like, imagine if this wasn't like that. So we tend to have a lot of those nerdy conversations about media and books, etc., that we love, and that's all I want from my readers. Like, I want to create an experience that they can read this book a second time and then be like, holy shit, there's something there that I didn't see, but this is how it connects to that. And I don't explicitly like pull out a lot of those, but I want to create that experience where people go back to it and they're like, yeah, this is truly a world that I can get lost in. Like, everything adds up, it makes sense. It's robust, and it's like, you scale back a layer and you're like, okay, this is where the world building or whatever, the logic will stop, and you're like, no, wait a minute, there's more logic, and there's more logic. So I had a lot of fun creating that, and that's the experience I want to create for my readers, and that kind of sees itself through in book 2 and book 3.
Oh, I cannot wait.
I can't wait.
I hope there's a Bollywood adaptation. It needs to be. That would be so fucking cool.
I really want Sendhil Ramamurthy to play Erawan. Like, my God, that man is like incredibly handsome. But every time I see him on screen, I'm just like, okay, he's Erawan. Like, look at him. Like, he is absolutely Erawan. So, yeah.
Brilliant. All right, well, Kritika, to close out, I would like to ask you 2 things. If you could give listeners and viewers, A, good bit of soundbite writing advice, and B, tell us a weird or random fact that you find to be utterly fascinating.
So, sorry, the first part of it was a good bit of writing advice, because I think you kind of cut out that. Okay, yeah. I mean, I don't know how original this writing advice is, but I'm going to say, write what you love. Make your books weird if that's the way to go. Don't chase trends, etc. I threw like a bunch of weird shit into my books. And, at the end of it, like, I was really writing for myself. And the thing is that if you are an astute reader, then, and if you're writing to, the kind of reader that you are, the more specific you make it, the more general it'll become in many ways, the more relatable, etc. it'll become. And you'll find your people, If you try to make it everything that it can be, it's going to be nothing. Make it something that you want it to be. So that's my writing advice.
Love it.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. And
then give us some weird shit.
Weird shit. Okay. Again, I don't know how weird this is, because I'm pretty sure this is fairly common knowledge, but I think about this kind of thing a lot, and it makes its way into a lot of my books as well. I find it fascinating that every single time you think of a memory or, you recall something that happened, you change it a little bit. and then it goes back and gets stored as a little change. So all of your best experiences and all of your worst experiences, and I think a lot of us will relate to this because, sometimes I think of like the worst time, etc., and it always seems like, oh my God, mortifying, terrible, etc. But it was never as bad as you think it is. So if you can take some comfort from that, then do, because memory is a weird thing, and it works in weird ways. So don't let it control you if you don't have.
Yeah, it's like the fallibility of memory. And I mean, we're just a storytelling species, anyways. And so we kind of like to dramatize everything. And so it's like, yeah, the middle ground, we forget about that shit. The bad and the good,
That's all.
yeah,
That's all that
we
remains.
amplify
Yeah.
the bad and the good qualities
Yeah.
until it fits a narrative that we feel can garner the reaction that we want, whether it's like
Right. Or we feel
pity
is worth
or
remembering.
smile. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Memory
Awesome.
is
That's
weird.
really
I
cool.
love books and like media and just exploring the concept of memory and how it works, individually, generationally, coming along.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, Kritika, thank you so much for hanging out with MJ and I. As well, for anyone who contributes to our Patreon at $10 or more a month, there will be a reading from Kritika for The Surviving Sky, Chapter 1. So go check that out. And Kritika, if you could let folks know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, I am. I'm still on Twitter. I'm there, kind of. I'm also on Instagram, but the best way to contact me is through my website. I have a contact form if you have any questions, etc. Feel free to drop them, and I'm sure I'll be able to answer in some form. But Twitter and Instagram and occasionally TikTok. So yeah, there you go.
Awesome. And I'll have links for all of that in the description below. You can also follow SFF Addicts on Instagram and Twitter at sffaddictspod, or you can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me across all the socials at MJ Kuhn Books.
Perfect. And go get yourself a copy of Among Thieves for some foul-mouthed thieves and
foul-mouthed fun.
Yeah, it's basically like MJ in book form, and it's great. And go pre-order Thick as Thieves because pre-orders matter, people.
Yeah, that's matter.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, that's it. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned next week for our part 2 with Kritika to hear our mini masterclass on science in fantasy. But for now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on
Thanks for having
SFF
me.
Addicts. Pleasure.